Thank you, everyone. We have a really exciting panel, exciting 50 minutes ahead of us to discuss smart cities and the role that cities play in this agenda. I'm the first Chief Digital Officer appointed for London. I was appointed over a year ago. And since then, what we've been doing is looking to pivot from traditional smart city thinking, which, if I can loosely characterize it as a discussion around systems and platforms, to modernize and update it and make sure that the city has the capability to be open to new forms of innovation, including GovTech. And so that takes a new look, I think, at what it takes to be a smart city, which is what we're going to be focusing on for the next 2 or 3 years. So what I'm going to do now is ask my panel a series of questions and then open it up to the floor for questions that you have of them. So I'm going to turn to each panelist. They're going to introduce themselves, say who they are, and muse upon the first question, which is, what are the building blocks of a smart city? So my the first question will be answered by Jan Vapaavuori, the mayor of Helsinki, Finland. Jan.
Thank you. I think that you already introduced me. Actually, yes, the mayor of city of Helsinki since a year ago. I think that the most important building block of a smart city is smart people. Especially in today's world, we are witnessing a technological change, which we have witnessed, also during the history, but it's more profound and more rapid than ever since today, and that's why it becomes more and more complicated all the time. And in order to handle this, I think the smarter people you have, the better educated people you have, the better possibilities you have as a city to be a successful one. And coming from Finland, which is a small country with a quite young history, we understood already from the very beginning that the only natural resource we actually have is the human capital, and an education have been the main building blocks for our success story. The second building block is trust. It is a complicated world. Of course, there are a lot of people who see a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of people who think it is a frightening one. And the better level of trust you have in the city, the better chances you have to cope with a changing reality. Also, coming from a small city like Helsinki, we are very well aware of the fact that the success of the city do not lie on the city itself and the bureaucracy. And we used to say that the city of Helsinki is above all a place and community, not a bureaucracy. And in order to empower this whole place and community, the level of trust plays a big role. And then the third building block is curiosity. I think that if you have the education, then if you have the trust there, then you have a better chance for people to feel optimistic concerning the future, being curious. And I think that is some kind of precondition for a creativity and innovation.
Thank you. Fran.
What's the building block for a smart city? Well, I think there's really one building block which is a complete deal breaker, and that's data. So the really big thing that is so often lacking and which so often blocks progress is just not having data. In some areas it's relatively available and relatively easy to collect now, like transportation data or things about harder infrastructure. But there is this huge gap in many cities around data around softer services, transactions, relationships, which is super important and which at the moment is not reliably collected or is often not of a quality that lets people fuel decision engines or good choices or successful cities. So I think that's the really critical building block that actually requires quite a lot of work over the next decade at least.
And what have you found in your travels about data and the quality of data, the varying levels of the quality of data from cities?
Yeah, it varies an awful lot, and quality tends to rise with usage. So in areas that are very used to using data to make decisions, so as I say, things like transportation, it's often relatively good and it's relatively easy to collect. In areas like education and social care, where we do actually quite a lot of our work is about things like projecting demand for those services and seeing how that demand would vary. So we need to simulate things, and we need to understand how human interactions happen and how services happen. The data is often very poor or very partial, and I think there's quite a long evolution to happen to improve that. And we see in some places where they've already started trying to use the data and gone, oh my goodness, it's not good enough, and gone through several years of improvement, it's actually way better than areas where they've not yet started that journey. You only work out what data you need really by attempting to use it, realizing that sometimes it's hopeless and having to start over with creating it.
Thank you. And just to introduce Philippe Wahl, who's chairman of Groupe La Poste.
We are proposing to each great city to work on the urban logistic. What is the issue? The issue is to struggle against congestion and pollution in the big city. So the building blocks are very clear. Fleet of electric car, regulation by the city, and also the solution for delivering an explosion in e-commerce parcel everywhere in the city. So we are installing ourselves as the partner of each city in Europe to deliver through really electric and totally green delivery in each city in France and in Europe.
Thank you. And finally, I'd like to introduce the Deputy Mayor of Paris, Jean-Louis Missika.
Well, hello everybody. So I am Deputy Mayor of Paris, in charge of urban planning, economic development, and Greater Paris. Well, my first reaction is to say that we must be careful with the concept of smart city. And I agree with the Mayor of Reykjavik. It's the smartness of a city is the smartness of its citizenry. And, but of course, we can try to build tools in order to improve the efficiency of a city, the quality of life of the inhabitants. The first tool, and I agree with you, is a platform for organizing data sharing. But a platform like this is only a tool. We need also the energy and the involvement of the citizenry in order to have a true conversation about the future of the city. And I think that the main move is about this: what kind of conversation, what kind of dialogue we could have between rulers and citizens. And the democracy, the local democracy, have to be reinvented in the 21st century. And this reinvention is about how make people be part of the decision, not only be part of the information, but also be part of the decision. How can we make this decision real time? And how can we make this decision interesting in order to make people be part of the conversation all along, for example, the creation of a new building or the transformation of a big area in a city. So in my view, of course, we need tools, we need technology, we need platforms, we need open data, open source, and so on. But also we need fresh ideas in order to make people be part of the decision, of the political decision at the local level.
And that is quite a nice tie-in to my next questions. We have here today an audience of many, many startups and scale-ups from France and from across Europe. I'd like the panel now to reflect on the role, challenges and opportunities for the entrepreneur and startup community to meet that objective, whether it is to enhance city objectives, to improve data, to improve engagement, or the logistics of the city so people see real benefits. Fran, would you like to start with data?
Yes, I mean, there are obviously loads of opportunities for entrepreneurs and startups and larger organisations to do exciting things in cities. I think it can be difficult to engage with city governments sometimes. I mean, to find a way to engage that's not about, startups are cute and innovative, but they're not for the real stuff is one sort of attitude that we sometimes encounter. So just finding ways to form those relationships which are, about having real expertise in the room and about having a good working relationship can take quite a long time and make it quite hard to work in this sphere.
And what if, in selling into a city government,
Yeah.
and this probably be a comment
Including
about
us.
London before my time, maybe, but what do you find in terms, when you find a contract, a partnership with a city that works, what are the elements of that?
I think it works well when it's just really clear what the value exchange is. So it's not just to be innovative or to be smart, but it's very clear why the city wants this and why this company can contribute that. And then it's a very clear relationship then and can be a really positive one. So I think just as long as there's good value in there, it's fantastic. I think where it can be more challenging is where it's sort of less focused or less clear what's needed. Although actually, to be fair, sometimes the sort of civic innovation ideas like the one in London can actually work really well when the city says, like, literally, we're quite open at this point and here are the terms of our openness, and then it works fine, but then it needs to be very clearly structured.
So in a sense, it's almost like a range of tools or
Yes.
a range of initiatives.
Yeah, exactly.
Some can be open, some can be closed,
Yeah.
but we need to sort of, in
The
a sense,
terms of
not
engagement just need to be
have
clear.
one term of engagement
Yeah.
like an old procurement process. Jan, what are your thoughts on engaging the entrepreneurs around us?
I think it's important to keep in mind that the city plays several different roles. It is a connector, it is a enabler, it is a driver, and then it's also a client. And actually, I think the client role is the most difficult one. I think, especially in the case of Helsinki, we see very much the city as a platform, as an enabler. We believe very strongly in an open data policy, and so on. We try to create good circumstances for different kind of business activities, including startups. But then, as a client, I have to admit that that is a more difficult case, and I think especially in the Nordic countries, with the public procurement rules, which are not always that easy ones, where we have a very strong belief in that we need to treat each and everyone equally, so we need to give everyone a chance, quite long-lasting procedures, and there I think that most of the cities, including Helsinki, we have a lot to do in order to be more agile and trying to develop our processes in a way which suits better in the way of acting the startups are used to do their job.
And from a perspective of the city of Paris, how do we engage with the entrepreneurial community to meet civic goals or make our public services more efficient? What success stories have you seen or challenges?
Yeah, I can give some example. For example, you have the contracts, and these contracts are generally focused on a very specific subject. For example, recently we have developed a system to accommodate the data of the connected objects. We have installed to supervise the thermal centers of all the city's buildings. So we gather this information, this data, and we use it to improve the energy saving of the thermal centers. And we have created this in open source, and we give the data to the startups and the businesses who want to use it to make some evaluation, big data, data science, and so on. So this is a kind of a platform we try to create and to develop. After that, you have all the vivid system of the ecosystem of innovation. All the startups who are working on subject about the city, and all these startups are in incubators, accelerators, some of them subsidized by the city, some of them private. But we try to organize challenges. For example, Data City challenges is a very interesting challenge. We ask questions about improving the quality of life of Parisians, and big companies and startups are working together to create a prototype to find new solution and fresh solution. So I think that we need these two blocks to make GovTech and Civic Tech living in the city. One is a special relationship with the startups and organizing hackathon and challenges. And the other one is traditional contracts with companies. Some of them big companies, like my friend of La Poste, and some others are small and medium businesses, and even startups. It's difficult for a big city like Paris to have a direct relationship, commercial relationship with a startup, but we try to do it, and sometimes we succeed to do it.
Great. And Philippe, what are your reflections on that?
Yes, in fact, the key word is the cooperation. Cooperation with cities, and we have discussion with the city of Paris, and also with Grenoble, Toulouse, all the great cities in France. And the second thing is cooperation with the startups, as the startups are providing us with solutions for urban logistics everywhere in great cities. So this element is absolutely key to transform the logistics in cities, to struggle against congestion and pollution, and to try also to transform the offering by La Poste and its subsidiary. And you just have the experience that this transformation in the public sector is not every day very easy and could create some perturbation, some confrontation. You just experience it. So we are transforming our offering, we are transforming the life of the citizen and of the city every day. That is our project through the urban logistics.
And do you see, from a situation of a large company, your role in accelerating innovation and providing services? How do you incubate those clusters of innovation around you?
Clearly, we started urban logistics in 2014, and we decided to lead the innovation process for urban logistics everywhere. And so we did visit the 20 largest cities in France, beginning with the city of Paris, to offer them this new contract around an electric car delivery to struggle against both congestion and pollution. And we were trying to become the leader of this new form of delivery every day in each city of France.
I think that smart city is also a new way of working with big companies and private sector. I think that partnership is the key word. Generally, when you organize a contract, you decide exactly what you want, So you don't have the diversity of the point of views, which is absolutely necessary in terms of innovation and transformation and digital transformation of the city. So we need a new kind of partnership with the private sector. For example, with Anne Hidalgo, mayor of Paris, we have created le Conseil parisien des mobilités, Mobility Parisian Council. In this council, you have all the stakeholders who are working inside the mobility sector in the city of Paris. And what is interesting is you have very old partners like RATP and SNCF, the big ones, you know, and it's about mass transit. But you have also the newcomers. You have Lyft, you have Lime, you have all these companies, you know, which are perturbating the public space, but in a good way, in an interesting way, because they are inventing the new electric mobility of the future. And what is interesting, and you have also the car makers like Renault and Peugeot, and what is interesting is that the conversation in such a forum, in such a place, is creating new ideas, new vision of what could be the mobility as a service platform of the future. And we all know, all the people around the table know that the mobility as a service platform will be a private, public, and people platform, the 4P.
And Jan, your reflections on
You know, usually when I recruit a new director to the city, I start by briefing him and her and telling what my expectations are. But when I recruited the very first CDO of the city some months ago, I did it the other way around. I asked him to walk around in the city, get some experiences, and trying to build a overarching understanding of where we are and where we stand, and then coming up to me and telling what I should ask him to do. And I think we should think a little bit in the same way concerning the public procurement. Because if we already have in mind what we want to purchase, and we do it by the book, I think the small and agile startups do not have really big chances. But if the starting point is the problem which we want to be solved, then I think that new companies, startups, innovative companies, and so on have a much, much better chance. And there I also would like to echo what my colleague from Paris told, that different kind of challenges is also a good way to enhance this kind of thinking. Helsinki is, by the way, participating in the same challenge with the city of Paris concerning cybersecurity solutions for small and medium-sized companies.
Okay, I'd like to throw some questions out to the floor now, just by way of interest. How many people here are from a startup or a scale-up? Just put your hands up. And so a good number. How many people have been involved in a city challenge or a city challenge initiative or a data initiative here? Right. Okay. And was that anyone in Paris? There we go. One. So success. So I'd like to just anyone to pose questions to the panel on this subject. Have we got someone with a mic that can roam the floor? Oh, great. Cool. Who'd say who you are and just a brief question? Thanks.
Bill Lodi. I'm CEO of a geospatial data company called Missika. My question to the panel is, when we all meet again in 2019, what's the one thing you would want to have achieved in 12 months' time as a priority?
So let's start off with Jean-Louis. Yeah.
Well, I've spoken about my platform of organizing the sharing of data. And this platform is focused now only on the eating system of the schools and the city halls and the gymnasium and so on. My vision is that next year we will have something like a platform about sharing data about mobility. And I think that this is the next step. And this step is very important, very difficult in Paris, but I'm sure it's also difficult in Helsinki because we have a lot of actors with data, and some private companies are not very open to the idea of sharing data, sharing their data in real time. So it will be a strong dialogue, a strong conversation. But I think that a city like Paris needs to share the data of all the service providers of mobility, and we will organize this during the year 2019. And we have also another challenge, which is a challenge we share with La Poste about logistics. I think that the e-commerce is transforming logistics in all the cities, and it's true also for the city of Paris. And we need to have a better organization, a better sharing of the public space with the service providers of logistics and what we call the logistics of the last kilometer is a big subject for the next year also. So we have these two challenges about mobility, mobility of persons and mobility of goods.
And Philippe?
For me, two words: widening, deepening. Widening because today we have an agreement with 6 great cities in France. So my objective is to have 20 next year. And deepening, having done more elements of the new logistic chain with the city we are working with today. So widening and deepening.
Fran, this time next year.
Well, from an entirely different perspective, but with a strangely similar answer to Philippe. So widening from an existential point of view, of course, I run a startup. We want to have more customers, do more sales, hockey stick growth, all those good things. But then from a less selfish point of view and a sort of deepening things point of view, I would absolutely love for our clients to start taking these things on for themselves, being very confident about how they're using data and products, and actually starting to talk to their peers, whether it's using our stuff or not, about how to use data, how to make it better, how to improve their decisions using data. Because I would love to see that concept spread very widely.
And what's the role in cities in making that happen?
Well, I think cities are these they're very central places with lots of resources, with often the best analytics professionals of all the sort of local government. So I think cities are sort of hubs of knowledge and sharing that kind of idea, which I would really like to see more of. Cities taking the lead on this stuff.
Jan.
From one year from now, I want to come here and proudly present my own management level staff, which are at the moment in a special training and education process concerning AI. I have to tell the story because I love it so much. It was last summer when I met the chairman of Nokia and told him that, like, on theoretical level, I understand what AI is, but I have not a very deep understanding of what it is in practical terms and what it could be in the city. And he told me that as a mayor, you should not blame yourself of that, and it's not your task to know, but it's your task to guarantee that your staff knows. And what we did was that we started a program where we have a mandatory training and education for all our management level staff concerning AI and other new technologies. And I really do believe that it's important for a city that you don't only have one CDO somewhere or some people who are IT specialists or specialists in technology somewhere, that also people who do not have technology as their main responsibility, that they have the basic knowledge and basic understanding of what's going on in the world in order to create a possibility for the city to grab in different kind of opportunities which coming in front of you.
It's great. Good question. So can we take some more questions? The gentleman at the front. There's anyone else? We can take them in a bunch. Okay. So gentleman at the front.
Hello. My name is Michael Courcil. Michel Courcil. I'm the CEO of Afrinews TV. And I want to know the names of this miss, because I don't heard when you present her. You forget to bring...
Oh, Francine Bennett is the founder and CEO of
Thank you very
Mastodon
much.
UK.
Okay. My question is, I see Helsinki, Paris. Next year, there's the European échéance. And I want to know if if you talk about Europe, I want to know if Helsinki and Paris can work together on the platform, on the same platform.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a really interesting question, which is essentially about how cities work together. So let's just hold that for a second. I might elaborate on it. There's a gentleman at the back who's just got his hand up just towards the back of the middle.
Hi, Roy Zaban from Creators Innovation Lab from Israel. My question is that organizing data and urban data specifically is an endless process. It never ends. And how can we get quick impact without waiting until all data is organized?
Okay, so I think that's a specific question, which Fran will probably be well placed to answer. Let's tackle that one first, actually, and I might draw people in, because actually we talk about digital leadership of a city, but the hard miles of data leadership is actually a task at hand, isn't it? So first of all, Fran, what?
Yeah, it's exactly true that organizing data is a never-ending task, that it will not finish in any of our areas. As soon as we organize the data we have, we'll start collecting it in new ways, and we'll need to organize more data. So that's not going to finish. The way we make an impact is by finding the use cases where we've got data that is just good enough, and we know that there will be a high impact in getting things right. So, you know, if we're thinking about predictive models, there are areas where we have some data, and maybe it's not perfect, but perhaps there's enough in there to be predictive to a level which is useful. And it's all about finding those use cases where the availability of data right now and what we can do right now overlap enough to create the impact. And that search process is actually one of the really important parts, I would argue, of using data in cities. It's not about how amazing your AI is as much as finding those use cases and getting them to work.
So the argument goes that, I mean, if you sort of say that there's, you know, if in its entirety you can find data which is just good enough,
yeah,
to get the ball rolling and to start discussions and end up with use cases. And there's one sort of line of argument which is maybe from the sort of more purist data science community, which might say all data must be perfect before you do things. What is the role of city government in promoting your proposed approach, and where's it worked?
So actually data scientists won't say data must be perfect, because any data scientist who's really done their job will know that there is no such thing as perfect data. There's only data which is fit for purpose right now in what you're doing, and it's not a fixed commodity. I think the role of city governments is to really clearly articulate what they want out of the data and why it is useful, and then that lets you work out where to invest your time and energy in a sensible way. I mean, I think no one's completely cracked this problem, but you see sort of centres of really interesting stuff. So I think, for example, the GLA has actually done quite a lot to try and articulate key areas and get London boroughs working together, because there's the 33 boroughs or 32 boroughs in a corporation who all have similar challenges. I expect your cities have also done interesting stuff in this. I think it is all about that very crisp articulation of what and why, and if I can improve this by 10%, what is that worth? And that lets you decide whether investment is justified in improving the data.
So it's a really interesting question that I come across in London, because as you said, we've got 32 boroughs, each serving a population average size of 250,000 people. They've got their own technology estate, which lies behind the services that they provide. They're something like 650 different lines of business provided by a London borough internally and externally. So that collects a lot of data, and behind that is a big question about whether it's at all computable and useful to us, and all sorts of other things that we need to think about in terms of data ethics. From a big city, from Paris, the question of fragmentation, of different technology estates, also maybe also a question for La Poste and Helsinki have come up with have been assisted by a government reform in this matter, I believe, but we'll turn to that in a second. What are the challenges you have in getting over that fragmentation of data, not just the digital services?
Well, the first thing is that the city of Paris developed an open data policy since 2008. So we have 10 years of experience, and our platform is used by a lot of academic, journalists, ONG, and of course businesses, companies. And a data set is improved when it is used. We are very aware that all the data sets we have put on this platform have been improved by the people who have used it. This is the first point. The second point is that in a city like Paris, you need to hire talents in order to be able to manage the data sets and sharing. We have hired a chief data officer, data scientist, and as you know, to answer the question, you don't need to have all the data. What do you need is to have enough data to build a model, a predictive model, and to answer the questions which are asked by the local government. And this is exactly what we are trying to do. Either the subject is social security or mobility or urban planning. We are working on data-driven urban planning, and we are working on data-driven mobility services. And we are learning. It's not deep learning, but it's learning. And I'm sure that in the future, for example, in our challenge data city, at the beginning it was only data analysis, and now it's artificial intelligence. And all the companies which are working with the startups are working on models based on artificial intelligence. So I think that the question is not the data and the fulfillment of the data. The question is mainly the know-how that you can keep in your company, in your city, in order to have a true conversation with other people who are stakeholders in the same subject. It's exactly the case in urban planning with information building systems. We know that in the future, all the conversation with real estate developers will be based on the BIM, building information management.
So, Philippe, and when we talk about the provision of data by the city, we always us in city government always tend to beat ourselves up because we've got the history of legacy IT, as if the private sector and companies don't have a big legacy IT problem. How do you see this play out?
We have all a huge IT legacy, especially ourselves in La Poste, as we have a legacy for now 6 centuries of business and public sector. So we have to work with that. And again, on the data basis, on the data collection, on the AI, the solution is to cooperate. Try to share tools, try to share data, because as it was said, the more you are using and sharing the data, the most efficient you are. And that's why we think that cooperation is key.
Yeah.
I learned today that roughly 90% of all data in the world is produced during the last 2 years. And the change will only get more and more rapid. So we are living in an imperfect world, and we will do that even in the future. Helsinki has also had an open data policy since 10 years ago. I read a study according to which Helsinki has opened more data than any other city in the world except the city of New York. But then another issue is whether it's relevant or not, or whether it's utilized or not. From my perspective, I think that in my city today, maybe one of the biggest challenges is that we have like too many domestic silos within the city. And even if our city is a quite small one, I can just imagine how much serious this problem is in some bigger cities. So we talk very much about cooperation between the public and private sector and with the startups and so on. I think we should also concentrate quite a lot on collaboration within the city in order to really understand what kind of data we have, whether it's relevant or not, what kind of data we should try to produce in the future.
And so turning to this gentleman's question at the front, which I think we can move towards closing on, I think it's a really, really important one about how, I think your question was essentially how when looking forward, would Paris and Helsinki and London be working together? I think one of the things that I've found surprising in my job, in a pleasantly surprising way, which is always good, is the amount of goodwill there is from cities towards each other in this sphere. We're not so much in competition, although London has a very big AI sector, much bigger than everybody else's, of course. But no, we're not so much in competition, seriously, but we see things that we face that are common, whether it's air quality or congestion or civil administration problems. And the spirit of the technologists in us is much more towards copying and taking someone's idea and adapting and improving than saying, perhaps like it was in the old days, we'll build our own, never mind them. How do you think cities can take this to the next level as we look forward in the next few years? How can Helsinki, London, and Paris form a stronger bond that perhaps is sometimes absent from our governments?
Well, I think that we are already working together. For example, the C40 organization for the organization for the biggest cities in the world for climate, which is shared by Anne Hidalgo. The C40 is organizing a worldwide competition called Reinventing Cities, which is, by the way, inspired by the Reinventing Paris competition we launched with Anne Hidalgo in 2014. And it's a competition for creating new kind of buildings which are more climate friendly. And it's a huge success. It's very interesting to see how cities are sharing information and know-how and knowledge, despite the differences between the regulation in urban planning in the different countries. And we have also launched a dialogue, a conversation about autonomous vehicles. And in the next summit of the C40 in February in Paris, there will be a common statement between some cities about how we can manage the eruptions, the coming of the autonomous vehicles in the big cities. So I think that this cooperation is already working, and it's working very well, because you're right. There is no competition between cities, except of course between Paris and London. But it's another question. But no, it's a joke. I think that cooperation is more important than competition between cities, and diplomacy of cities, it's not exactly the same as diplomacy of nation states. And it works better because we don't have, for example, conflict about land, because we are not in a situation of being in the same frontier. So I think that we should improve cooperation, because the period we are living is a period of great innovation, sometimes disruptive innovation, and everybody cannot experiment everything. So we can share experiences, and maybe we can do more and organize different kind of experimentation in different cities in order to see what is the best solution for a problem which is shared by all the cities. So I am a great believer about cooperation between cities, and maybe more, because if, for example, the cities of the C40 are able to design rules of the game for autonomous vehicles, it will be mandatory for the car builders and for the service providers.
It's almost like a new form of regulation. You put in some standards, they must be adopted. Yang, and so we'll just be briefly summing up here, but what are your, how can we cooperate better together?
We are witnessing an era of a growing importance of cities. The urbanization leads to that. The fact that many nation states have failed to solve global pressing problems leads to that. The fact that the toolkit of the cities is in many cases more relevant than the toolkit of the nation states, and that the cities have a much more concrete, direct contact and dialogue with the citizens. And this has led to a time where cities are trying to partner with themselves a little bit in the same way that nation states did some decades or centuries ago. But in this case, I think the chances for real cooperation is much, much higher. And I think it's based on the fact that cities, they seek for real-life solutions for real-life problems. And the very pragmatic approach, which is a totally different one than the angle from the nation states. And we just have to do that in order to solve these problems. It's a question of benchmarking, it's a question of best practices, it's a question of co-creation, it's a question of co-challenges and so on. And we are on a good way.
Philippe.
I think that in the future, every city will have to regulate transportation of goods as they regulated and organized transportation of people. So clearly, for us, urban logistics is a key word for the future.
And Fran, last word.
Yeah, and keeping my data blinkers on, I think it's really about keeping on using data to try and create those solutions for the problems that we have, using data to power those machine learning and AI machines that we build. And where the data is not good enough or doesn't exist, keeping on that process of creating the data we need to fuel the improved cities.
I think it's a really, really fascinating question, which we could obviously discuss further. One of the great things that we have as cities, as these major universities that are located with us. That's another source of collaboration. It's another source of problems set out and possible solutions if we can get the data right and the leadership right. I think in the future, the fact that cities are experimenting with new forms of engagement, civic innovation prizes like we're doing in London, and Amsterdam has them, New York, Paris as well. These are things that we should be aiming towards, I think, in the future, joining together on some of the big challenges or some of the small challenges. Sometimes for the citizen, we think about grand things like solution to congestion or air quality, but fly tipping, dog mess, these are the things that will really make a difference to people's lives. And actually, on a day-to-day basis, so finding the ways in which we can set out the problems large and small as cities is the way forward. So I'd like you to thank our distinguished panel in the time-honored way and enjoy the rest of the conference.